Welcome to Legal Intelligence, powered by IVIONICS, offering practical insights and innovative digital solutions. Let's dive right in with your host, Tom.
So I have a question for you.
Okay.
When you're using a straw, you go to a restaurant, do you unwrap the top and then pull the straw out, or you do one of those, slam it on the table and then
No. I tear it in the middle.
tear it in the middle?
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting. Actually, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say tear it in the middle.
Well, with kids, how else are you going to shoot the straw at them?
Okay, you always got to do the shoot the straw.
You got to shoot the straw.
I feel like that's a 3/4 of the way, not in the middle though.
Well, you don't have enough air. Again, half is perfect.
That's what you discovered is the
Yes.
best. Okay,
Yeah, I mean,
all right.
30 years of testing.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna have to ask your kids about that.
Fair enough.
So Pierre, glad you're here with us today, VP of Strategic Operations. Tell me a little bit about that.
So it's really about kind of preparing for the market, getting IVIONICS services and our offerings that we offer today ready for the marketplace, as well as understanding what's coming down the road and preparing for that.
Okay, interesting. Okay, and then what is most of your clientele? What are they based on?
From a industry perspective?
From an industry
Right.
perspective.
So
right.
yeah, we've specialized in law firms for over 30 years. So it's where our area of expertise is. So bringing solutions to law firms is something that we understand everything from the entire life cycle of a law firm across different practice groups and different sizes.
So 30 years.
Mhm.
30 years is a long time
Yep.
to be in one. Okay, so
You're
got to
calling
be
me old. Fair enough.
I was actually going to call you an expert, but
Okay,
you
I'll
can
take-
take
I'll
it
take
however
expert.
you
That's
take it
good.
however
That's
you want to
good.
take it.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that legal space,
Mhm.
what are, because obviously it's tech legal, right? Or legal tech is what they call it, right?
Yep.
So what technologies are they currently using right now? What do you see in the future with technologies?
Great question. It's really what we call legal intelligence, right?
Okay,
So it's
interesting.
a
Okay.
combination of legal and our expertise in legal, because there are specialties in every industry. Ours just happens to be legal. So all of your content, so everything about a law firm is their data, right? So in most industries, working in Word may be something that's a helpful tool, that they maybe write memos, they maybe put documents together. But for a law firm, it's their entire work product, right? So
right.
when an attorney's putting their ideas on paper, when they're getting ready to file things, Word is their tool of choice.
Okay.
So it
So
becomes
kind of
far
like
more important.
Right, so kind of like an accountant maybe would use Excel.
Correct. It's it's the tool of their trade.
Right.
So whereas most organizations may use file stores or SharePoint or Dropbox to save their content, that's not strong enough. It's not robust enough to be able to search all of the content that law firms are producing on a regular basis, because the production of the law firm is their work product, their intellectual property.
Right. So I can only imagine how much documents a law firm, right?
Correct.
Do you have sizable law firms as clients?
Sure,
Like,
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I can only imagine how many documents would a law firm even have?
Yeah, and that's funny because different firms have different types of document sizes, right? So there may be firms that are very transactional, where they're just producing documents all day long for a numerous amount of clients. Others have a select group of clients where they're only working on very large content. And it's different
Right.
types of documents. There's the documents that they're producing, and it's the documents that they're searching through from other firms or other cases. So, they may have a discovery
Right.
where, content is being brought to them because they have a case. They have to search through this content, and that content may be 20 to 100 times their own document store. So
Right.
now they have a work product to deal with that they have to secure, they have to back up, they have to make readily available to their attorneys, their litigators to search through, and they need to be prepared to do that on a regular basis, and then store that maybe for the duration of the case.
So that brings up an interesting point, because you've been doing this for 30 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine 30 years ago or so, right? There was no technology like that,
Mhm.
right? So wasn't it like, I think I've seen movies and things like that where they're like, oh, you want your discovery, and it's like 50, 60, 100
Right.
boxes of just stacks
Yep.
of papers
Yep.
that they had to go through.
Mhm.
So nowadays you're saying it's all digital,
Perfect.
but just because it's digital doesn't mean it's any easier. Maybe you still have storage issues, right? It's just not physical storage issues, it's
Yeah.
digital storage issues.
Yeah.
And
I think the benefit of spending a lot of time in a field is you see everything as it matures. So
Right.
you're right. Very often I have conversations with firms and attorneys, and the analogies I use are documents, physical documents, file cabinets, folders, manila folders, Redwell folders, which is the accordion folders that a matter sits in. So when you equate it to that, they understand it.
Right.
And so exactly what you're saying, the problems of data in the past where I would print out a document or they would file a brief, then they would print it out, put it into a physical file, store it in a file room, and then at some point the file, expires or the file gets to a point where they're no longer an active case. They put it into a box. They would take it off-site for off-site storage, right? So there was an expense to that.
Sure.
They'd be paying an off-site facility for that content, and if they wanted to retrieve something, there would be an expense to that. Fast forward to today, it's the same exact thing with a virtual file.
Right.
So now that physical file becomes a document on, a Word document. You're saving it to an electronic system. Now the cost of that electronic system to store that document is less than the physical paper, but it's still high when you have a massive amount of content. Because now you have much more content than you used to. Now you, rather than paying to store it to offsite storage, now we're archiving it to another location. Again, there's a cost to still storing it, but it's less than before, and there's a cost to retrieve it.
Interesting. And do you think because it's digital, people will save more documents than necessary? Like if it was physical, they might be like, you know what, this document's not as important. I really don't need this one. Right. I'll just file away what I really need. Or and then now it's just digital. So does everybody just file out?
It's a massive amount of storage.
Throw it into
it's everybody stores way more than they need to because it's time and effort to go through stuff. So
Right.
part of what we do is leverage technology to help refine that. How do we get it so that they're understanding that cases that are no longer active, they need to put an expiration date on that. Some firms do it, some firms don't. Our goal is to help do that. Now, today, you have to do that almost manually. So somebody has to evaluate whether a case is active, not active. This is where we start to get into the next thing that you brought up earlier, which is what's happening in technology, AI, artificial intelligence. So leveraging AI to be that partner in your work, that's a repetitive task that you no longer have to pay somebody to do.
Right.
You can have AI go through and say, hey, what are the cases that haven't been touched? What are the cases, that are not active, based on the billing system? We haven't billed any hours on that in a certain period of time. And then let it go on its own and move it from, hot storage to cold storage where you're going to save money.
So let's go back for a second because not a lot of people might not know. What are the difference between hot and cold storage?
Great question. So hot storage basically means it's something that you need at every moment in time. So it's an active case. At any point, somebody could call you, call the attorney or, have a question and say, hey, I need, to know the current status of that lease. I need to know what the numbers are. It's something you're actively working on.
Right.
So that's where you'd want something that is readily available at your fingertips. After a case closes, you still have to retain that data. Maybe the client calls you in a year or 2 or 3 years later and says, hey, I need some information on that, those documents. Well, you don't need it on that hot file because it's expensive to store it there. How do we move it to a location where maybe within 12 hours, 24 hours, I can retrieve it? So I can ask the IT staff or I can ask the system to retrieve that content, and it takes it out of a long-term storage, brings it to me again, and now I can produce that product for the client.
Interesting. Okay. That's so almost like a cold case file in
Yeah.
like a right.
Okay.
Detective work. Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's interesting. So I had a feeling I was laughing because when you said AI, because AI is like the big thing, right? Everybody's talking about AI. That's the hot topic now. So AI is innovative.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you I guess what I would say is how do you stay compliant but yet still be innovative, right? So you're gonna innovate, you're gonna come up with new things, new AI, things like that. But how do you keep that compliance, especially in legal? I can only imagine compliance is important.
No, it's a great question. If you have the proper systems in place, this is the beauty of it, right? So really, what are you trying to do? You're trying to protect your data and your client's data. So the question is, how do you do it? Well, if you have a GRC, a governance, risk, and compliance program in place already, then when AI goes to see that data, it will have to adhere to those policies anyway. A lot of firms don't have that in place. So the first thing we try to do is work with firms to understand that you need a committee. We have a foundation of AI that we call, the building blocks to even getting started with AI. So a lot of firms are just opening AI, they're finding a cool product, they're turning it on, and now they're letting their attorneys start to leverage, those features within that, whether it's, searching, case repositories, whether it's searching their document repositories, whether it's doing, rewriting their content for them. Those are all things that attorneys are opening up the doors to without really knowing what the risk is. And so Our goal is to help them understand that the first thing you do is to pull a group of people together, have an AI committee. Once you have that AI committee, which probably encapsulates more than people think, we would include finance in there, HR in there, marketing in there. So there's a lot of components that they may not be considering today that they need to consider. Once that's done, then you need to create a policy. What is the AI policy? This group can decide. Bring in outside parties such as ourselves to help understand what AI is, where it is, and what the risks are to make sure that they're accounting for the risks when they build out their new policy. Once they understand the risks, the first thing they want to do is, how do I lock it down? Because they don't
Right.
trust each other. They don't trust the attorneys. Not only because they could be doing something that the firm doesn't want them to do, but they may not even be aware of what they're doing,
Right,
which
right.
is a fair response. So after the committee creates the policy and locks down the systems to prevent things from going forward, then we build a roadmap with the firm to say, how do you expect the technology to be advantageous to the firm in the future? And then we can work on a roadmap. But that roadmap may be like, hey, we're going to hold off for a year. We're going to lock the systems down for 1 year and maybe have a pilot group of users. That's fine policy.
Right, right. That's pretty interesting because you even said you brought in all other departments too, finance, HR, and even consider all of that. 'Cause that's pretty interesting. So not only do you have AI for the attorneys, but it also could be. Are you saying that it could also be for HR? Could be using it, finance could be using it, and that's why you want those in that committee because they could also be leveraging it.
Right. Yes, because what you want to consider is that if you just want a workflow, if I say I want a document to come to the system, and when it comes in, I want to fill out some data points, and then from there, it's going to build me a lease agreement, and then from there, it's going to forward it for signature. I can do that without AI. I don't need AI to do that.
Right.
What AI does is it helps make decisions. So again, bringing more data into it allows that network of intelligence that AI is bringing to the table. The more data you give it, the more intelligent a decision it can make. So if you bring in the document storage and the history of document activity along with the time data from the attorneys, you can say, is the attorney's time matching the amount of time they're putting into documents on a case?
Right.
So
Okay.
again, the bringing that data together, you don't need a person to look at these two pieces like you've traditionally had to do. You can have the system look at it and throw a flag up. It's a help. Now your accounting department's getting a flag that says we're seeing a lot of time going in, but we're not seeing a lot of work going on the back end, or vice versa. We're seeing a lot of work going in, but we don't see a lot of time going in.
Right. Right. So interesting. You said something that I never really thought about with AI. You said AI is helps with decision making, basically. So instead you were like, anybody could just do this quote unquote monkey work or whatever you want to call it, but instead now you're like AI can actually make decisions, help make decisions.
Correct.
So that's a pretty interesting way of looking at it that I didn't think of.
Well, because a big
Looking at it that
part
way.
of accounting systems in a law firm is great. We get all the data in, we're getting bills out, but how do I know what's working? And so the biggest challenge with a lot of these accounting systems is getting reports. And every firm wants custom reports. They go to the provider and they say, "Oh, I need a report that that tells me who the biggest billers are, which clients are the biggest billing, which ones are last week, how were they against last year." Well, imagine if that managing partner who's asking all those questions wouldn't have to go to their accounting department and then have their accounting department go to their outside provider to write a custom report.
Right.
Then they get the report and then they look at the report and say, "That's not what I wanted." Now, all those things that I just said, theoretically, the managing partner can ask AI. Asking AI can then translate that into queries against the data and then give an immediate answer back to the managing partner without anybody else's involvement. Now, that doesn't mean he should make rash decisions based on that information,
Right.
but at least it allows him in his own time, or her in her own time, to go through all of this and evaluate, oh, I see where I'm getting data, and then pick and choose, make some evaluations, and then send that out to the accounting department. Say, hey, this is some of the data I'm getting from the questions I'm asking. Can you validate it and come up with some solutions to the problems that we're experiencing?
Right. So that's pretty interesting. I didn't even think of that. And they can literally on the fly adjust that report, keep asking
Correct.
different prompts
Correct.
to get their report exactly how they want it,
Correct.
and then use that
Right.
data.
And the goal is for that managing partner to ask AI, and that AI with the proper setup and the proper agents can be prompting, okay, I see the hours for Tom were great last month. Which clients did he do the most document work on? And now it's going to go to a different system
Right.
to then give an answer and saying, well, I see most of Tom's work was spent on Acme Corp. And then you're like looking at the billing note, but what was Acme Corp's billing last month? So these are all the things that are going through a managing partner's head,
Right.
but has a probably has a tough time articulating it to the accounting department. And then again, there's this gap between what they're asking and what they're getting. And that's where AI is going to really fill a niche. Is you're still going to need the brains. It's going to be able to evaluate that and give you answers back. No different than the internet did when it came out, and no different than computers did when they came out.
Right. Okay. So what about if attorneys are asking AI, is there some kind of, I guess what I'm looking for is like a legal, right? Because there's going to be, you can ask AI anything, but I'm sure in law firms, you need to know the law for the specific state or specific types of cases you're working on, anything like that. Is there any AI systems in place that would just be like, hey, we're just going to look at, these types of laws or these types of rules or regulations or whatever we look,
Great
trying to
question.
look into.
So yes, right. So you're talking about different sources of data.
Right.
So a little bit about what we've been talking about is the data in the accounting system, which is proprietary to the firm.
Right,
Again,
exactly.
Now I need to protect that data because, again, there's sensitive data in there, what cases I'm working on, what cases different attorneys are working on. We also talked about using AI against your document storage, which, again, has very proprietary data in there. So, again, very security conscious. Now you're saying, like, well, what if I want to ask questions of data out in the internet, whether it's through some provider that's holding all of the case law? Because, again, going back to our traditional model, every law firm used to have books on the shelf. And all the case law. And they'd go to the books, and they'd take the book, they'd open the book, and then that moved to CD, and then it moved to the internet, and now they're putting AI in front of those products. So yes, an attorney can say, hey, I see this issue with this case I'm having, go find case law, and maybe it finds some obscure case that an assistant would have never found. It's going to find all that case law. Now, the thing to remember is, and that's why you could be as a firm saying, like, look, I've worked the way I've worked traditionally, I'm fine working the way I work. But if your competition is getting these obscure cases that you would have never thought of, you're getting barraged by things because they're leveraging AI and you're not.
Right. So we need to stay, and when I say we, law firms, all of us.
If you need a
anyway,
lawyer.
Right. need to stay up to date. Need to stay current.
Yeah, like anything else, right? It'd be like you couldn't have a law firm competing with an inkwell and a fountain pen.
Right.
In today's day and age, you couldn't write something fast enough to keep up with somebody who's using a word processor, using Word, using all the tools of Word. So, just think of it as another level of efficiency that's being built into a system that if you do not leverage, you can't be competitive.
Right. Yeah, because I could see cases being lost because someone didn't use AI. And like you said, they found an obscure case and totally crashed your case.
And if you're a brilliant attorney and you're using a fountain pen, you were doing great in your day. You still need a brilliant attorney. The AI is not going to replace the brilliant attorney or paralegal or whatever that person happens to be. You still need people. It's an assistant. It's a tool to be used.
That's interesting that you say that because a lot of times I think people are really worried about, AI is taking over the world. AI is taking over jobs and things like that. But the way you bring your perspective in is, hey, we need these people, but this is an assistant. Look at it more as an assistant to the person instead of almost basically like having a robot right next to your desk.
Right.
Hey,
remember,
hey, AI.
You got to remember at this point in time, AI is not thinking. It's emulating a thought process.
Right.
So again, would you want AI to be representing you? Yes, it can state case law. It can find case law that emulates what you have. But it's not going to be able to create unique thoughts to identify and empathize with what you're going through as a defendant potentially and saying, how would I think of this? How would I handle that?
Right.
So you still need, there's a personal touch that still is needed. It's there to replace the repetitive tasks that are inefficiencies within the process.
Very interesting.
Well, it wouldn't be a very good conversation if we didn't say anything interesting, would it?
No, it's an interesting way of looking at AI. Like I said, making it more of an assistant and in that fact instead of just being, it's taking over the world and things like that. So that's actually pretty interesting. So how are you getting these attorneys to start accepting AI? I'm sure some people are probably all in for it. AI, I'm the latest, and some people are probably not.
Right.
So how do you get them in it? And is there some kind of age, I guess, do you see like where younger people are jumping right in, and is it the older attorneys that are, or?
Yeah. Great questions, and no different than the internet, to be honest with you. When the internet came out and computers came out, it's the same model. Most law firms are going to move at it because their competition is moving to it.
Right.
And they know if they don't move to it, they're going to be caught behind. They're going to be unable to compete in the marketplace, no matter how smart they are. So the reality is, we almost don't have to force it. We have to just educate. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing today. That's what we do on a regular basis. We educate prospects and clients to understand that AI is not the enemy. If nothing else, lock it down, because it is a risk. Just like when computers, just like the internet. When the internet first came out, a lot of firms,
computers are still a risk, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of firms kept their typewriters because they're like, we don't trust these computers. We have no idea what's going to happen. Now you couldn't run a law firm without email today. You know, again, people are emailing all over the place. 80% of the content we see going into the document management system, which we talked about earlier, is email. Right. So, I mean, there is a lot of content going through that way. And again, that wasn't that long ago that it was seen as a, you know, hey, be careful about what you send in email. Now it's flying like crazy. So again, it's totally understandable that they would be reserved about AI as well. But the reality is, as they understand it, and attorneys are very smart, once you can spend some time explaining to them the advantages of it, show them the advantages of it, and it doesn't mean you need to be on the bleeding edge of technology. No, you know, but there are ways to leverage it today. You know, so for example, there's a lot of different large language models out there, whether you're using Copilot, whether you're using Gemini. You know, these are all different, ChatGPT. These are all different models that are used. The question is, what is your firm standardized on? Because you wouldn't want to use, just like the old days with browsers, you wouldn't want somebody using Firefox, another person using Chrome, another person using Explorer, another person using Edge. There's a lot more risk when IT has to secure all those things.
I can only imagine.
Same thing here. You want to secure all these, you know, these LLM models? Yeah, you need to. And then once you pick one, once you identify which one best suits your firm's needs, then you secure it. You prevent people from going to the other one. Now you can control, as an organization, this is the large language model that we utilize for efficiency purposes as well as cost purposes. AI is not cheap. So if you have to understand that if you're using AI and it's not costing your firm anything, you are selling something, and that's probably your data.
Right. Interesting. AI is not cheap. That's a good line. That's an interesting line to that's an interesting takeaway. I remember, and this is, man, showing my age a little bit too, but I remember back in the day, I was big, you know, VHS, DVDs were just starting to come out. And I remember going to Blockbuster Video and renting VHS. And I remember there was a little section for DVDs. And I remember I was like, you know, not getting into these DVDs. I like my VHS. And then there was one day I went there with my girlfriend at the time, and we were like, let's rent a movie for the night. And there was 95% DVDs, and it was like a little rack for, you know, and we were like, I guess we have to switch to DVDs. That's
now imagine if you were a client, you go to a law firm, and they're running on VHS at the time. Right. Again, they're not able to keep up. And then it went to streaming, right? And so it's exponentially growing. So whereas in the past they could say, well, I waited on the internet. I took my time. I waited on computers. I took my time. I waited on security. I took my time. This is something that is getting exponentially faster. You're talking about 6 to 12 months. All firms are moving in a model. So a lot of firms are already leveraging AI without their own knowledge. They have attorneys. You mentioned it earlier. Younger people are coming in. They want to use AI. They're familiar with using AI. So whether the firm knows it or not, if they have not locked it down, then they are logically going to use that as a tool to get things done.
Which leaves them open for security risk.
Correct. So it's nice for a firm to create a policy, but the realities are they really adhering to that policy. Right.
And if they don't have someone there to basically guide them, like you said earlier, like, hey, we got to put a committee in place. We got to put some compliances in place. If they don't have that, they're just going to be...
Yeah. Look, if you have 100 attorneys, not all 100 attorneys have to be in a room to understand it. But yes, a select group of managing, the managing partner potentially, the IT committee, different people need to be involved in this process to understand the benefits and the risk, and once you get that under control, then you'll start to see, hey, let's reduce the risk. Great. Now let's get our benefits. What can we do to benefit from this tool? You don't have to jump right into benefit, which is, again, the biggest mistake that firms are making is A, leaving things open, B, jumping on the bandwagon to get a tool without any concern about what they're opening the door to.
Right. Very interesting.
So let's say I'm not paying for AI. Let's say I have an attorney that creates a paragraph in a document, and they're very concerned that they don't like the way it's worded. So, they just got out of school, 12 months ago. And in school, they were just taking their documents, putting it into ChatGPT, and getting them to rewrite papers for them. So again, They signed some policy when they came on board, but did they read every policy? You know,
Does anybody ever read those policies?
And that's the question. So the reality is they can now cut and paste. They're going to ChatGPT. They're pasting it in because they're using a free model of Gemini or something along those lines. And then next thing you know, they're going away. They cut and paste right into the document itself. They figure I just closed my browser, so that went away.
Right.
I don't have to worry. I closed my browser.
Right.
It's gone.
But it stays there
But the
forever.
browser's not like a TV. You turn it off, it doesn't go away.
That's actually a good point. That's
right.
a good
So
point.
you've paid for the use of that service by allowing that AI to use you for future training.
Right.
So if
right.
I've pasted information in there, there's a potential that I've locked that in. Now, if the firm made a choice, a logical choice instead, to say we're going to pay for X model of AI, Copilot or something else, you can then build it into a structure that is guaranteed not to use that information for future training.
Right.
But again, the firm needs to understand that.
That's pretty interesting. Do you use AI personally?
Yes.
Well, actually, do you, even a further question, AI personally or in your job role?
Sure. Yeah, we use it. I use it personally as well as professionally. But again, it has to be in a structured manner. So
Right.
That's the key. The
Right.
key is to understand the risk and lock it down. For example, we recommend laptops for most of our attorneys because they're very mobile. They need a high power. They need a lot of flexibility.
Right.
But we also say, you need to lock that laptop down. You can't just, as an attorney, go to your home computer or some computer, kiosk or in a business center and connect to these web applications that most firms are using today.
Sure.
We lock that out. So
Because
you can
like you
only
said,
do it
with
right.
the TV. You can't
right.
turn it off.
Correct.
If you go to another browser.
Correct. You go to
right.
that browser. There's
Right.
no security on it.
Right.
So now you're depending on very limited amounts of security that are done on the back end of the systems. By putting that laptop in place and putting security on that laptop, you're securing it. It's the same thing with AI. By now taking that laptop and saying you can only go to these AI models, which we've done internally, it limits the tools I can use to make sure I'm not accidentally using something that I didn't expect to use.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Hmm.
All right. And then personally, what do you use them for?
I use it, in every way you could possibly imagine, right? So it's an experiment. I use it for automation in my home. My lighting. Again, you use Alexa, something like that.
Okay.
You use Google.
Yeah.
These
Right.
are all things that are leveraging AI. I don't think I use a browser for searching without using AI today.
Right.
I'm constantly using my phone. Maybe I'm traveling. I will be asking Gemini questions while I'm driving and have it give me replies while I'm driving. So it almost becomes that informational friend that pops up in the back of your mind when you have
Right,
a question. And you used to be able to type it in a browser, but why
Sure.
wouldn't you have a conversation hands-free when you feel comfortable, when you're ready, when you need that curiosity.
Right.
Another good example is AI has the ability to not just answer simple questions. You could say to AI, look, I'm really interested in I want to get into a new activity. I want to get into archery. So you could say, you know what? I want to go deep dive in archery. Now you could spend hours going online and looking up different papers, or you could go to AI and say, give me a deep research paper on all the aspects of archery today. And it'll come back after, 2 or 3 minutes with like a 50-page document that you can read through that gives you, it's almost like a book of your own liking.
Right. Okay.
And you can say word it in any way you want. You can say word it from a perspective of somebody from the 1800s. So you can ask it to be creative in a way that most adheres to your desire.
I like using the one I think from The Office, Michael Scott, when he's like, "Explain it to me like I'm 5."
Exactly.
That's usually
and that's another great way to do
Right,
it.
right.
Again, if it's a technology like, let's say you want to know about quantum physics, explain it to me like I'm 5, right?
Yeah.
That's a great
Right.
way to use the technology.
Right. So, do you know a thing or two about archery?
A thing or two, yes.
You
Yeah,
do?
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know how it relates to AI, but other than the fact that doing investigations, yes, yeah.
All right, that's good. Yeah, I've done archery like once or twice, so it's
Yeah.
pretty interesting.
Yeah.
All right. What would you say is the best part of your job?
People.
Which
Yeah,
people?
working with people. I mean,
Yeah.
it's computer. I'm in the computer industry. I've been into it for quite a while, like we said. But it's really not the computer industry. It's the people industry. Computers are just a tool. I love making people, utilizing the technology to do their job better.
Right.
Get more
Right, so-
efficiencies, get more personal time when they need it, get more flexibility when they need it. That's what we love to do.
So you make an interesting point because I never really thought about that. So you're saying basically, even though I'm in tech, even though I'm helping with computers or things like that, really I'm just helping people use the tech. Basically,
Oh yeah,
is
Yeah. We're not a back-end system company, right?
Right.
So we don't build systems that work independent of any need of people. Most of the time, we're dealing with computers as it relates to people in the seat doing something with those computers.
Right.
Right. So there are systems that you could build on the back end that just, it's going to go back to, somebody still would have to think of it, but it says, go out and search the universe for black holes. I'm going to point to it now, go back and give me data, years later,
Right.
based on what you found, star mapping. No, we're literally taking people who are doing their job today and making their job better, faster, easier, more flexible.
Nice. For today. So
Great.
I really appreciated this opportunity. I actually learned a lot. You actually opened my eyes to some different ways to view AI and not just think of it so much as AI is taking over the world, like we said, and more use it more as an assistant.
Not to say it's not.
Right. Well, you never know,
That's
right?
Coming.
It's
But
coming.
we can talk about that next time. We'll keep it optimistic right now.
Sounds like a plan.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you for coming aboard.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in to Legal Intelligence powered by IVIONICS, where we break down tech, innovation, and insights for the modern law firm. If you found value in today's episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a review. It really helps us reach more listeners like you. Until next time, stay secure, stay smart, and keep leading with innovation.